Old Mr. Abernathy was a tough nut to crack. Even at 92, lying in that plush, oversized bed that probably cost more than my first house, he still had a glint in his eye. Not exactly kind, but definitely sharp. I'd been working for him for 10 years, cleaning his enormous mansion, cooking his bland, doctor-approved meals, and generally being invisible. That was how he liked it. He was a millionaire, a self-made man, they said, and he treated everyone, even his own family, like they were slightly beneath him. But now he was dying. Everyone knew it. The parade of doctors, all with fancy degrees and even fancier suits, had delivered the verdict. Natural causes, they'd say, shrugging, as if watching a man fade away like a wilting flower was just part of the job. His children, 3 of them, all grown and just as stiff-necked as their father, would nod solemnly, then whisper about inheritance in the hallway. I'd pretend not to hear. But everything echoes in a house this big. My name is Clara. I'm not a doctor or a nurse or anything special. Just Clara, the housekeeper. I've seen a lot of things in my life, raised 3 kids on my own, and learned to read people better than any textbook could teach you. And something about Mr. Abernathy's natural causes just didn't sit right with me. He was getting weaker, sure. His breathing was shallow. His eyes, once so commanding, were now often unfocused. He barely ate, and when he did, it was like chewing sawdust. The doctors would come, poke and prod, murmur Latin terms, and then prescribe another pill. He was on so many pills. His nightstand looked like a pharmacy display. One afternoon, was changing his sheets, the expensive Egyptian cotton ones, naturally. He was usually asleep at that hour, or at least pretending to be. But this time, his eyes fluttered open. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. "Clara," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. I paused, holding a pillowcase. "Yes, Mr. Abernathy." Are they waiting?" he asked. I knew who they were. "His children?" "They're in the living room, sir," I said gently. "They've been here all day." He let out a weak, humorless chuckle. "Vultures," he mumbled. Then he grimaced, a sudden sharp pain contorting his face. He clutched his side. "Are you in pain, sir?" I asked, concern lacing my voice. He waved a dismissive hand. "Always. They say it's old age, but it didn't look like old age pain to me. It looked specific, localized. I'd seen that kind of pain before. My own mother, bless her soul, had suffered from gallstones for years before they finally figured it out. The doctors had done all sorts of tests, of course. Blood work, scans, the works. They assured everyone they'd covered all bases. But something nagged at me. They were looking for big, obvious things, a heart attack, a stroke, cancer. They weren't looking for the small, insidious things that can slowly, painstakingly steal a life. A few days later, Mr. Abernathy had a particularly bad spell. He was sweating, shivering, and rambling. His daughter, Mrs. Albright, a woman whose every wrinkle seemed ironed into place, was beside herself. Not with grief, I suspected, but with exasperation that her father was taking so long too. "Well, finish. The doctor said he just needs rest," she declared, looking at me as if I were somehow responsible for his decline. I nodded, but my gut churned. He wasn't just resting. He was fading, and something felt profoundly wrong that evening. After the family had left, and the night nurse was dozing in the armchair by the fireplace, I sat by Mr. Abernathy's bed. He was barely conscious. His skin was pale and clammy. His breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. I remembered something my grandmother used to say. Sometimes the smallest thing can cause the biggest trouble. It was a simple saying, but it held a lot of truth. I looked at his hands, thin and bony, resting on the crisp white sheet. His nails were slightly discolored, something I'd noticed before but hadn't paid much mind to. They had a faint yellowish tint. Then I looked at his eyes again. They were cloudy, but around the whites. I thought I detected a faint yellowing to dot jaundice. The word popped into my head like a flashbulb. I'd seen it once briefly in a neighbor whose liver was giving out. But the doctors had run liver tests, hadn't they? They said everything was within normal limits for a man his age. I took a deep breath. This was crazy. I was just a housekeeper. What did I know? But something in my heart told me I had to do something. I gently moved the sheet, looking at his stomach. It was slightly distended, but that could be from anything, really. Still, the combination of the faint yellow, the pain he'd mentioned in his side, the lack of appetite, the general malaise, ... It all pointed to one thing in my mind: his gallbladder. Or maybe his bile duct? Something was blocked. I knew I couldn't just tell the family. They'd laugh me out of the house. Clara, you're a housekeeper, not a doctor. They'd say, probably with a condescending chuckle. I needed proof, or at least a doctor who would listen. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. It felt audacious, a little bit crazy, but I couldn't let Mr. Abernathy just waste away. I called my nephew, Michael. He was a resident at the city hospital, a sharp young man with kind eyes and a good head on his shoulders. I'd helped him through medical school with what little extra money I had, and he owed me a favor or two. Aunt Clara, is everything all right? He asked, sounding a little worried. Michael, I need your help, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's about Mr. Abernathy, I think. I think the doctors are missing something. I explained everything: the subtle yellowing, the pain, the general decline that didn't quite fit the natural causes diagnosis. I could hear him listening intently on the other end. Aunt Clara, he said after a moment, I can't just barge in there. He's got his own medical team. I know, honey, I said, but please, just come, just look. You don't have to say anything to them. Just ... observe. He hesitated, then sighed. All right, Aunt Clara, for you. But I can't promise anything. I felt a surge of hope. Michael arrived that afternoon, dressed in a casual shirt and slacks, looking more like a concerned relative than a doctor. I introduced him to the family as my nephew, a medical student, a little white lie to keep them from getting suspicious. They barely acknowledged him, too engrossed in their own discussions about Mr. Abernathy's will. I took Michael up to Mr. Abernathy's room. The night nurse was gone and the day nurse was on a break. It was just us. Michael quietly observed Mr. Abernathy, his brow furrowed in concentration. He checked his eyes, his skin gently palpated his abdomen. He listened to his breathing, his heart. He didn't say a word, just absorbed every detail. Finally, he straightened up. Aunt Clara, he whispered, you might be right. My heart pounded. What do you think? His bilirubin levels are definitely elevated, he said, tapping a finger on his chin. The jaundice is subtle, but it's there. And the abdominal tenderness. It's consistent with an obstruction. It could be a gallstone or a tumor in the bile duct. Something's blocking the flow of bile. But the other doctors, they didn't see it. I asked, bewildered. Michael sighed. They're looking at the big picture. He's old, he's frail. They're probably attributing everything to his age. Sometimes when you're looking for a hammer, you miss the nail. What can we do? I asked, my voice barely audible. We need to get him a proper workup, Michael said, his voice firm. An ultrasound, maybe a CT scan. They need to look specifically for a blockage. But how? How could a housekeeper and a young resident get the mighty Mr. Abernathy's medical team to listen? I thought fast. Mr. Abernathy's personal physician, Dr. Peterson, is coming tomorrow morning, I said. He's the head honcho. Maybe if we can get him to just look closer. Michael nodded slowly. It's a long shot, Aunt Clara. They don't usually appreciate unsolicited medical opinions, especially from someone outside their established team. But it's his life, Michael, I said, my voice cracking. He might be a difficult man, but he deserves a chance. The next morning, I was a bundle of nerves. Dr. Peterson arrived, a tall, imposing man with an air of absolute authority. He was flanked by two younger doctors, like lieutenants. After they had finished their routine examination and were preparing to leave, I took a deep breath. This was it. Dr. Peterson, I said, my voice surprising myself with its steadiness. Forgive me for speaking out of turn. But I've noticed something about Mr. Abernathy. He turned, his eyes narrowing slightly. Yes, Clara. His tone was polite. but clearly dismissive. I've observed a slight yellowing of his skin and eyes. I continued, pressing on. And he's been complaining of pain in his side, more specific than just general aches. My nephew, who is a medical student, also noticed it yesterday. One of the younger doctors snickered. Dr. Peterson just raised an eyebrow. Clara, we've conducted extensive tests. Mr. Abernathy's condition is consistent with advanced age and natural decline. There's no indication of anything specific that we've missed. But what if it's something small? I pleaded. A blockage in his bile duct, perhaps a gallstone. Dr. Peterson's expression hardened. With all due respect, Clara, while we appreciate your concern, medical diagnoses are best left to trained professionals. We have thoroughly examined Mr. Abernathy. I felt a surge of despair. They weren't going to listen. Just then, Mr. Abernathy stirred. He'd been mostly unresponsive, but something in the conversation seemed to have pierced through his haze. He opened his eyes, and for a moment, that old sharp glint was back. He looked at Dr. Peterson, then at me. Clara is right, he rasped, his voice surprisingly clear. Everyone in the room froze. Dr. Peterson looked stunned. The other doctors exchanged uneasy glances. Mr. Abernathy, Dr. Peterson began, you're experiencing some ... disorientation. No, Mr. Abernathy interrupted, his voice gaining a bit of strength. She sees what you don't. He struggled to lift a hand, pointing a shaky finger at me. Listen. To Clara, a silence fell over the room, thick and heavy. Mr. Abernathy, a man who had rarely shown me any respect, was now on what might be his deathbed, advocating for me. It was an unexpected, powerful moment. Dr. Peterson, despite his initial dismissiveness, was clearly thrown. The patient, the millionaire himself, had directly contradicted his assessment and vouched for his housekeeper. It was an unprecedented situation. Very well, Mr. Abernathy, Dr. Peterson said, his voice tight. We will ... reevaluate. We can order an ultrasound. Just to be absolutely certain. His tone suggested he was doing it more to appease Mr. Abernathy than out of any real belief in my observation. But it was a start. The ultrasound was scheduled for that afternoon. Michael, pretending to be just a curious family friend, snuck into the hospital to be there. I waited at the mansion, pacing, my heart in my throat. Hours later, the phone rang. It was Dr. Peterson. His voice, usually so calm and authoritative, was laced with a hint of surprise and perhaps a touch of embarrassment. Clara, he said. You were right. I sank into a nearby armchair. Relief washing over me so powerfully, I felt weak. What did they find? A gallstone, he explained. It's quite large, lodged in his common bile duct, causing a significant obstruction. It's the source of his jaundice and his pain. It was just subtle enough that our initial scans, which weren't specifically looking for that, missed it. He paused. We're scheduling him for surgery immediately. It's a delicate procedure given his age, but it's the only way to clear the blockage. If we hadn't found it, he wouldn't have lasted much longer. I closed my eyes. It's a silent prayer of thanks escaping my lips. The surgery was successful. Mr. Abernathy, against all odds, pulled through. The recovery was slow, and he was still old and frail, but the change was remarkable. The yellow tint faded from his skin and eyes. His appetite returned. And slowly, painstakingly, the sharp edges of his personality began to soften. Just a little. When he finally came home a few weeks later, he was a different man. Not entirely, of course. He was still Mr. Abernathy, a man of wealth and strong opinions. But something had shifted. One afternoon, as I was bringing him his tea, he looked up at me, his eyes clear and surprisingly gentle. Clara, he said, his voice still a bit weak, but firm. I owe you my life. I just smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. I'm just glad you're better, Mr. Abernathy. No, he insisted. You saw what they, with all their fancy degrees, ignored. You saved me. He paused, then looked directly into my eyes. And for that, Clara, I am eternally grateful. It was the closest thing to an apology. or even a compliment I had ever received from him. It meant more than any bonus or raise. It meant he finally saw me. Not just as the housekeeper, but as a person. From that day on, things were different in the Abernathy mansion. The family still bickered about money, but Mr. Abernathy seemed less interested in their squabbles. He spent more time talking to me, asking about my day, even sharing stories from his own life, stories I never thought I'd hear. He even started calling me Clara, without the formal Mrs. or the dismissive tone. One day, he called me into his study, a room I usually only entered to dust. He was sitting at his grand mahogany desk, a will laid out before him. "Clara," he said, looking at me over his spectacles, "I've made some changes to my will." My heart gave a little lurch. I wondered if he was going to leave me a small sum, a token of appreciation. "I've made sure you're taken care of," he continued. "More than taken care of. You'll have a comfortable life, Clara, and your grandchildren too." I just stared at him, speechless. And he added, a hint of his old mischievous twinkle in his eye, "I've established a foundation in your name for promising young medical students who might not have the means to pursue their dreams. It will be called the Clara Jones Scholarship Fund." Tears welled up in my eyes. I couldn't speak. It wasn't just the money or the scholarship. It was the recognition, the acknowledgement that a simple black housekeeper, someone who had been invisible for so long, had made a profound difference. Mr. Abernathy lived for another 2 years after that. They were good years, calmer years. He was still himself, but with a gentler spirit. He read more, he listened more, and he often just sat in his garden watching the birds, a peaceful expression on his face. When he finally did pass, it was truly from natural causes, peacefully in his sleep. His children mourned him, of course, but I think I mourned the man he became in those last few years. The man who learned to see beyond titles and social standing. The man who, on his deathbed, was saved by the person everyone else ignored, and me. I inherited enough to live comfortably, to help my family, and to know that my voice, my observations, had mattered. The Clara Jones Scholarship Fund still sends bright, deserving students to medical school every year, a testament to the idea that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes from the most unexpected places, and that a simple housekeeper with a keen eye and a caring heart can truly make all the difference in the world.